If you close your eyes and think of the 1950s, you can almost hear the saxophone. It was in the clubs, in the jukeboxes, on the radio, and echoing across stages from Harlem to Hollywood. Few instruments captured the range of human feeling the way the sax could. One night, it whispered in a ballad, smooth as silk. The next night, it screamed through a rock and roll riot, raw and unpolished. Jazz musicians turned it into a tool of exploration. Rhythm and blues players made it a party starter. And by the time rock and roll arrived, the saxophone was just as loud and unruly as any guitar. Here are 10 saxophonists who defined that decade. Voices that shaped how the horn was heard, remembered, and carried into the future. Even though Charlie Parker passed away in 1955, his shadow stretched across the decade. Bird had already changed the language of jazz in the 40s with bebop, but his final recording showed he was still restless, still searching. His alto sax ran through dazzling lines one moment and heart-wrenching lyricism the next. For younger players, Parker was both inspiration and burden. To play alto in the 1950s was to stand in his long shadow. Every phrase, every daring run seemed to remind the world that he had set a standard almost too high to reach. He may have left early, but in the 1950s, Bird was still everywhere. If Parker was the past and present, Sonny Rollins was the future. By the mid-1950s, Rollins had earned his reputation as one of the boldest tenor saxophonists alive. His album Saxophone Colossus, 1956, wasn't just a title, it was a declaration. Rollins played with humor, quotation, and a sense of adventure. His sound was huge, his rhythm playful, and his solos felt like journeys you never wanted to end. He could turn a calypso riff into a jazz statement or stretch a simple tune into a masterclass in improvisation. To hear Rollins in the 50s was to hear the tenor sax becoming monumental. In the 1950s, John Coltrane was still carving out his identity, but the fire was already unmistakable. Playing first with Dizzy Gillespie, then Miles Davis, and later Thelonious Monk, Coltrane built a vocabulary that pushed the horn to new limits. By 1958, his album Blue Train announced him as a leader in his own right. His sheets of sound technique, cascades of notes that seemed endless, showed both his technical skill and his restless spirit. By the end of the decade, Coltrane wasn't just another tenor player. He was the one everyone knew was about to change everything. Where Parker's bebop had been fiery and Coltrane's playing searching, Cannonball Adderley brought joy. His alto saxophone had a big, bluesy tone rooted in gospel and soul. When he joined Miles Davis in 1957, his exuberant solos added heat and swing to the band's sound. On stage, Adderley radiated warmth. He was accessible, humorous, and overflowing with groove. His alto was like a smile translated into music, jubilant, spirited, and impossible to resist. In the 1950s, Cannonball showed that modern jazz could be smart without losing its joy. Lester Young, Prez, had influenced Parker himself back in the 1930s, and in the 1950s, he was still a gentle force. His light, airy tenor tone contrasted with the heavier sounds of the new bop generation. Even as his health declined, his playing carried a grace and relaxation that defined cool. Young's phrasing was conversational, his swing effortless. Where others pushed, he floated. In an age of intensity, Press remained the embodiment of elegance. His cool breeze blew through the decade as a reminder of the saxophone's softer side. If Lester Young represented one branch of cool, Stan Getz carried it into the mainstream. His silky tone on tenor became a hallmark of the 1950s. Whether in Woody Herman's band or leading his own groups, Getz turned ballads into glowing statements and improvisations into lyrical journeys. His playing was smooth but never shallow, melodic but never cloying. By the end of the decade, he was already leaning toward Brazilian music, setting the stage for the bossa nova craze. But even before that, Getz's horn was velvet, lush, tender, and unmistakable. By the 1950s, Coleman Hawkins was a veteran, the man who had first proven the tenor sax could lead jazz back in the 30s. But rather than resting on history, Hawkins embraced the new sounds. He worked with Thelonious Monk, welcomed bebop, and showed younger players that a giant could keep growing. His tone was deep, muscular, and commanding. Even surrounded by a new generation, Hawkins held his own, proving that the father of the tenor still had lessons to teach. While jazz players were chasing harmony, King Curtis was busy making people dance. His tenor sax riffs powered early R&B and rock hits, and his sharp, biting tone gave those records an unmistakable edge. Curtis specialized in short, catchy solos, bursts of raw energy perfect for the jukebox. He bridged worlds, trained in jazz, but fully at home in the rougher grooves of rock and roll. In the 1950s, he showed how the saxophone could belong to both sophistication and street-level grit. If Jerry Lee Lewis was fire at the piano, Big J McNeely matched it on sax. Known for lying on the floor mid-solo or parading through the crowd, he turned performances into chaos. His tenor screamed high notes, honked in rhythmic bursts, and sent dancers into frenzy. His 1949 hit Deacon's Hop lit the fuse, but the 1950s cemented his reputation as the wild man of the sax. McNeely proved the horn wasn't just an instrument, it was theater, rebellion, and raw fun. For the final spot, two names deserve recognition. Rudy Pompili, blowing with Bill Haley and his Comets, gave Rock Around the Clock its honking drive and turned the sax into rock's brass backbone. Danny Flores, with the Champs, immortalized a riff in Tequila, 1958, that still echoes across bars and stadiums. Both men weren't jazz innovators, but their playing defined the sound of teenage rock and roll. Their saxophones were raw, brash, and unforgettable, the perfect close to a decade when the horn could be anything. The saxophone of the 1950s was a shapeshifter. With Parker, it burned. With Rollins, it towered. With Coltrane, it searched. And with Adderley, it rejoiced. With Lester Young and Stan Getz, it glided. With Hawkins, it thundered. On the other side of the spectrum, King Curtis, Big J McNeely, Rudy Pompili, and Danny Flores turned it into the sound of rock's unruly youth. 10 different voices, one instrument, all speaking the language of a decade that was anything but quiet.